Reusable bags are one of my most favorite things to sew. Not only is it an excuse to have another project, but it's also a great way to keep some bags from ending up in landfills. So today, we are going to make this reusable lunch tote that has some heavy-duty straps on it, and it's also lined with vinyl in the inside, so it makes it very easy to clean out. You can just use a household cleaner to clean it out with. So it's very simple to do. You are going to start with 2 squares of fabric, and these happen to be, for this size tote, these are 13 foot. So when I sew and across the bottom, bags are one of my most favorite things to sew. Not only is it an excuse to have another project, but it's also a great way to keep some bags from ending up in landfills. So today, we are going to make this reusable lunch tote that has some heavy-duty straps on it, and it's also lined with vinyl in the inside, so it makes it very easy to clean out. You can just use a household cleaner to clean it out with. So it's very simple to do. You are going to start with 2 squares of fabric, and these happen to be, for this size tote, these are 13-inch square pieces of fabric, and you've noticed on the other side here that I have fused it with some fleece, and you can just follow the manufacturer's instructions on the back in order to fuse it to your fabric, which I've already got done here. So the way that you start is you just put the right sides together like this, and please be aware of your direction if you have birds or words on your project to make sure that they are facing up. And then you're going to simply pin down both sides and across the bottom, and then you're going to stitch it with a 1/2 inch seam all the way around. Please do not sew your opening shut. I like to put a pin up here to remind me that this is my opening, and I should not sew there. Guess how I learned that one? Okay, once you sew the entire thing with a 1/2 inch seam, you will basically have what looks like this. Ta-da! Okay, we're going to set this aside for now, and now it's time to do the vinyl, which we're going to do separately. So if you notice, I'm going to leave this here for a moment. Here are my vinyl pieces. You'll notice that my vinyl is 1.5 inches shorter than this one. So these are 13-inch pieces, and this one is 11.5 tall. The reason why is when we put the bag together, we're going to be folding this over the vinyl like that. It's kind of difficult to turn vinyl inside out. It's not really a fun job, so we're going to kind of cheat and overlap instead. So you'll notice with my pieces of vinyl, this is a 12 gauge vinyl, and you can get it at your big box fabric stores. But you'll notice, see how it's sticking? I'm kind of having a hard time opening it. You can hear it peeling open. So it comes backed with paper, and when I sew with it, I like to use the paper on the back. This vinyl will actually stick to the base of your sewing machine and also to the bottom of your foot. So when I sew with it, I like to keep the paper on the back first, and you'll also notice that I don't like to use pins. It's really difficult to get pins through vinyl, and then I end up bending all of them. So I just like to use paper clips. So you will notice that I have paper clipped all the sides together, like that. And be aware that this is wider than it is tall, okay? So you're going to be leaving the top edge, which is the widest edge, open. And then you're going to sew it exactly the same as you did the other one, with a 1/2 inch seam, so that you end up with this, okay? Now, we want to leave the paper on when we make our gussets. However, if you don't tear the paper off in the seam allowance, then it will be in your finished project. Once you flop over the seam allowances and sew them in place, it's kind of hard to get the paper out. So you just want to basically gently, if you pull the paper toward the seam, it'll peel off fairly nicely, just like that. And the rest of the paper is underneath the seam enough that it will stay in place while we fold and sew our gusset. I'll do the last side here. And of course, you want to follow the instructions that says recycle to keep in theme with our reusable bag. Alright, once your seam allowance has been removed, we can now set this aside so that we can fold our gussets. So we're going to do this first on the piece that has already been sewn of the outside, just because it's a little bit easier. So I am just going to tuck my hands in here and kind of spread this bag open so that the bottom seam, which is underneath, and the side seam, which is right here, are now touching. And you can't really see, but I'm kind of looking in the bag, and I'm looking right along here and right along the bottom to kind of get those seams to line up really nicely. When I think I've got it, I'm going to just fold this nice and flat. Make sure my seam allowance is going this direction. I'm going to turn it over and make sure that my seam allowance throughout is all going the same way. Just makes life a little easier. Alright, now we're going to test and see if our seams are right on top of each other. I'm just going to take a sewing pin and I'm going to put it right through the stitching right in here and push it right through to the other side. Now, that's pretty close. I could spend my entire day trying to get these perfect, but really, on the finished product, it doesn't make that much of a difference. So for today, this is okay with me. I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to put a pin over here on this side through all of the layers to hold them into place, and then again through this side to hold all of the layers in place. Now the seams that are right on top of each other right here cannot move either direction. So you would repeat that process with this side as well and pin that side, and then we're going to measure down how far we want our gusset to be. We want to make a 6-inch gusset, which means that's the 6-inch side. That's this guy right here, okay? This side right here is 6 inches, which makes the whole bag 6 inches square. So we are going to measure down 3 inches on our seam. So you'll notice I'm lining my ruler up right at the very top of the stitching, not up here at the seam allowance, but right there at the stitching. And I'm going to measure down 3 inches. And with my fancy iron-off pen, I'm going to make a little mark, just like that. Then I'm going to use the straight edge of my ruler. Notice there's a serrated edge too. That's not really any fun to work with. So I'm just going to draw that line all the way across. Okay, so that is the line that we are going to sew on. So I am going to move my machine over here, and we're going to sew this line. Now, it's a little bit difficult to get this started because you are sewing a line this way, but this is a diagonal line. It's a bit fussy to start on. So you want to try to get your needle as close to the top of this line as possible. So I'm just going to move my needle over to the center position here so that I can see my line a little better. Easier than having the needle to the left or the right. I'm going to go forward for a few. Don't forget to backstitch. If you forget to backstitch, likely you're going to get a hole in your bag and then your apple's going to fall out. No good. So when you get to the bulky part, you just slow down a little and press that nice and flat. Backstitching at the end also. Once you are done, you can remove your pins We'll just pull these guys out. And now you have one corner sewn. If we were to turn this inside out, this triangular flap right here is just going to create a bunch of bulk, so we want to cut it off. So I'm going to grab my scissors, making sure we're sewing with a 1/2 inch seam, so make sure you leave a 1/2 inch. And we're just going to cut it right off, like that. And we're still a safe distance away from the seam, but we've also removed all of the bulk. You're going to repeat that exact same process with this side as well. When you turn it inside out, you are going to have this, and that will be finished. Now, we are only going to, I was showing you earlier, once we put the vinyl lining inside of the bag, we're going to fold this edge over to hide the edge of the vinyl. However, this edge is not finished. Normally what you would do is fold it over once and then fold it over twice so there's not a raw edge showing, but that is awful bulky to sew through 2 layers of this fused fabric and also the vinyl. So what we're going to do is we're just going to do a basic zigzag stitch. If you have a machine that has an overlock stitch, it's nice to use the overlock, but if you just have a zigzag, that works just fine as well. So I'm going to bring my machine over. And because I'm sewing in the round, I'm going to pull this little piece off, and I'm just going to tuck my bag right over the side here, and I am going to switch to my zigzag stitch. And you want to try to get the edge of your needle during your zigzag to be right on the edge of your fabric, okay? We're trying to prevent it from fraying as it's used, and this is a good way to do that. So I am just going to do a zigzag right along the edge here all the way around to prevent my fabric from fraying. Going to check which way my seam allowance is going here. Sew over that. Once you get to the end, you're going to overlap where you started, and of course, do a little back stitch. It's my favorite thing to say. Don't forget. Okay, and we can pull this out. And now our raw edge has been reinforced so that we can turn it over, and we don't have to hide this raw edge. We can leave it as is. All right, so now it's time to repeat the same process with the vinyl. So here is our vinyl piece, and we're going to make a gusset in this as well. So we're going to repeat the same process. I am going to open the vinyl. It's very sticky, sticking to itself quite a bit. Press this open. Okay, I'm going to lie it down like this, making sure my seam allowance is going the same way. Now, this is a little bit more fussy with the lines, but again, I'm just going to push this corner down, and if you look inside, I'm just going to try to get this line lined up with that line, just perfect. Okay, I'm going to turn it sideways a little so I can kind of grab it from the outside. Now with vinyl, you have to be very confident with this stuff, okay, so just really smash it down. And it also responds very well to finger pressing. So I am just going to finger press this really nicely, and then I'm going to test my seam to make sure that I am right in line. That's pretty good for today. So I am going to jam your pins in. Please don't use your favorite pins because you're just going to ruin them on this stuff. So I'm going to put pins on either side, just like I had before. And then we're going to repeat the process. We're going to measure down the gusset. 3 inches. And we're going to make a mark. Now, of course, we have peeled the seam allowance paper off of the seam allowance right there, so I can't draw there. So you're going to have to estimate. Just go with your gut. A lot of people hate it when I say that word in sewing, but... Okay, so I'm going to bring this over here. And again, we're starting on that diagonal line. I better get off my zigzag stitch. Move to the middle. Now, the thing that you're going to want to do with vinyl is it's quite a bit thicker than regular fabric. So once you get all lined up, your tension knob, which is usually right here on the top of your machine, it's usually around 4 or 5 when you're sewing with normal fabrics. I'm going to go ahead and turn it up to about 8. And don't forget to backstitch. So you can see I'm using a fairly small machine to sew through this, and it's working just fine. One of the tricks to sewing with vinyl, besides leaving the paper on it when you sew, is to have a sharp needle, okay? Some of these entry-level machines have very small motors in them, and you could really tax the motor trying to get through a lot of fabric, but if you just put a sharp needle on it, that will help take some of the load off of the machine and put it on the needle so that it can get through a little easier. All right, once we're done, we're going to clip our threads and pull that guy out. And then again, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're just going to cut the extra bulk right out of the bag, just like that. Okay? Then you're going to pull out your pins. You're going to repeat this process with the other side over here, and then you're going to gently tear the paper off of this as well, and you can see it's already starting to come off, so this ends up being a little bit easier. So we're going to set that aside, and then you will have something that looks like this. So what I like to do is, these seam allowances right here are kind of sticking out, so I just like to fold them down like this, and I'm just going to put some weight on my fingers here so that we can finger press this down, and it will lay a little bit nicer when we go to put it in. Okay, I'm going to do the same on this side as well. All right, so now we have 2 pieces of our bag. We have the inside piece and we have the outside piece, like this, okay? We want to put some handles on this bag, so we're going to mark the placement for those. We're going to lie this guy down, and I'm going to get my ruler, and from one of the side seams over here, I'm going to measure over 3 inches, and with my iron-off pen, I'm going to make a little mark. I'm going to do the same on this side as well. And then I'm going to turn it over and do it on the back, too. This is where our webbing handles are going to go. Now, you don't have to use webbing for your handles. You could probably make your own, but they're super sturdy and they hold up really well, so I like to use webbing. So these are 20-inch pieces of webbing that we're using here, and this one is a polypropylene. You can get them in cotton, you can get them in different kinds of blends, but I like this one best because it has a really soft hand, and if you're carrying it with a lot of weight in it, especially if you end up making a grocery bag out of it, making it a little bit bigger size, you want something that's soft to the touch. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to fold it in half like this. Okay, and we're going to match these edges really, really well as best you can. And then you're going to put a pin right through there. Okay, you're going to fold the whole thing in half, matching the raw edges like this. Okay, but you want to leave about 3 inches of this free so that you'll be able to tuck it under your under the exterior of your bag to attach it. All right, so now it's a little bit interesting to sew this, so I'm going to show you how. I'm going to change my foot to my zipper foot. I'm going to take this one off and put my zipper foot on. And I am going to do my best to sew as close to the edge as possible. So I'm going to tuck this guy in here, and I'm going to watch my needle. I'm going to lower down here. And you have to pay attention because it's really easy to sew right off the edge and miss completely. So I'm just going to lower my needle in right away to be safe. Then I can remove my first pin. Okay, and I still want my tension pretty high because even though this is really soft material and it's easy to go through, it's pretty thick. So I'm going to sew forward for a couple of stitches and then say my favorite thing again, don't forget to backstitch. And then I'm just going to sew all the way down the length of this handle, backstitching at the other end 3 inches from the end as well. So just really pay attention to where your needle is in your project. Backstitch at the end, and then pull it out. And now you have a nice thin handle that's ready to be sewn into your bag. So we're going to set that aside for now, and we are going to place the inside into the outside of the bag. Okay, so this can be a little bit fussy because vinyl is very stiff and tends to, cause you problems. So if you look inside of the bag, you will see down in here, I have the same seam allowance, okay, inside of the bag, and it's kind of sticking up. So what I'm going to do is I am going to squish this in half like this. I am going to try to match this part of the bulky part of the seam with the same bulky part of the seam right down in there, all right? And I brought along some wonderful tools called binder clips to help us force it into place. So I am going to get this guy, and we're going to kind of force him down inside. And the whole point, of course, is to match up the side seams. I have a side seam right here on the outside of my bag, and I have a side seam right here on the lining. So it's the same as any other sewing project. You want to match up the side seams. So I'm just going to get this right in there. Once I can see that they're matched, and I'll show you an interior shot here in a moment once I get these guys together where I want them, okay? So now my seams are right on top of each other. If you can look in here, I can show you a little shot of the two seams. There's a seam right here, and then you can kind of eyeball the seam on the vinyl, and you can tell right where I'm pinching they're matching up. So now I'm going to turn this guy over, and I want to keep them there, and there's no way I'm getting a straight pin through there, so I'm just going to smash the whole thing with a binder clip. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, now we've got those guys in place. Put these down so that it'll stand up a little bit. Okay, so now what we're going to want to do is match the side seams up here at the top as well, okay? So you can see through the vinyl, so it's pretty easy. I'm just going to put one seam right on top of the other, and you can see right there that they are correct. I'm going to fold down about 1 inch of fabric over the vinyl, and then I'm going to use another binder clip to hold that in place, just like that. And then I'm going to repeat that same process with the other side. All right, now that we have the side seams taken care of, we can walk around the entire mouth of the bag, folding over about an inch, and this time I'm going to use some paper clips to keep this together. And I'm just going to go around the entire mouth of the bag, fold it down about an inch or so, and then put a paper clip in place to hold it. So once we've got that done, we're still missing our handles. So if you look right in here on this side, we've got 2 marks where the handles are going to go. Okay, so I'm going to take a handle, and I want this to be on the outside. So as I take this handle to place it, I am going to just tuck it right under here, like so. Okay, right on my mark, and then this time I'm going to use a straight pin to hold it into place. But before I do that, I want to fold it back upright like this, okay? Oops, and I have it backwards, look at that. So let's flip it around like this. And then we're going to fold it upwards like that. Okay, you want this little crease to be facing the inside of the bag. It just looks nicer on the outside. So then I'm going to put a pin in here to hold that closed. Okay, just right through all of the layers. Make sure I don't scratch my manicure. It's important. All right, so now we're going to take the other handle and we're going to put it near the other mark on this side. So, making sure my handle isn't twisted, I want to tuck it up inside and then fold it up like this. That looks pretty good. That's not twisted. Okay, I'm going to pin that guy into place using a straight pin. All right, and now we're going to do the same with the handle on the other side. Now that we've got that one tucked under there, put a straight pin, and now we've got both of our handles on. Once both of your handles are pinned into place, it's time to top stitch the whole thing into place. So, for this, I like to top stitch with my zipper foot, but because there's so much bulk, I'm going to top stitch with my regular foot. The very first thing I'm going to do is sew about a 1/2 inch seam first. Depending on how much you were able to get folded over, you want to make sure you're actually going to sew 2 top stitches around the whole outside. If you look at this bag right here, you'll notice that there is an actual top stitch right here, which is close to the edge, and then there's a second one down there for security purposes. So we're going to do the first one, the deeper one first. So I like to start at a side seam so that nobody can notice my back stitching, since it sometimes isn't all that great. Now, this can be a little bit difficult to sew only because you have these webbing handles that are kind of getting in the way as you're going around. So just go nice and slow and be patient and you'll be fine. So I'm going to lower my tension back down maybe to about 6. I'm going to increase my stitch length to about 3.5 just because a longer stitch on the outside looks nicer. So I'm going to get started, and I'm just going to gently pull my paper clips as I'm going. Okay, and And then I'm going to pull my pins for my handle only when I'm close to sewing it down and my fingers are taking the weight, okay? And then I'm just going to sew right through the webbing, all those layers. And you can see, because I have a sharp needle, even though this is an introductory machine, it goes through just fine. And you're going to sew all the way around, just like that. So here's where the handle's kind of getting stuck. So I want to pull it out, make sure it's out of the way, can move that pin for my handle, go over the second one as well. Yep, all you have to do to get through those thick layers is have a sharp needle and turn that tension up, and it will make all the difference in the world. Now, if you're going to be doing a whole lot of sewing through thick fabrics, so if you have a really big family and everyone you know is getting one of these for Christmas, you probably will want a little heavier duty machine than this. But if it's on your Christmas list for somebody else to buy you, you might just have to wait. All right, so we're almost all the way around. We're past our fourth handle, and we're coming up on our original stitch. And of course, you just want to aim for that stitch. Drive over it for about 5 stitches, and then do your back stitch. Now, for the second stitch, what I like to do is simply leave my foot where it is. I'm just going to move my needle position from all the way to the right, from all the way to the left, your right, all the way to my right. And then you're just going to go all the way around again a second time, just to give it that nice finished look. We're meeting our original stitching, and we're going to go backwards over it. Once you're done, you pull it out, trim all of your threads. You can remove your binder clips off of the corners. And once all your threads are trimmed and it looks beautiful, it will look just like this one right here. You can pack your lunch in it and off you go. The nice thing about this pattern is that you can also translate this easy lunch tote into a grocery bag like the one behind me. The one behind me is actually made with an 8-inch gusset, so you would measure down your seam 4 inches, and it's made with 22-inch squares, but otherwise it's made exactly the same. So not only can you have an adorable reusable bag or lunch tote, but you can also be earth-friendly.